Professor B. Ravindran. He is an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. He obtained his master's from Indian Institute of Science and PhD in Computer Science from University of Massachusetts, Amherst. His current research interests span the broader area of machine learning, ranging from spatiotemporal abstractions in reinforcement learning to social network analysis and data and text mining. Much of his current work is directed toward understanding interactions and learning from them. He has co-authored several research papers, including the chapter on reinforcement learning in the Handbook of Neural Computation, published by the Oxford University Press. Next, I welcome Professor Ravindran to come in stage and to deliver his lecture.
Good afternoon, everyone. And it's been a long day, right? So I'm going to go on for another 2 hours. Let's hope I can sustain people's interest. So when I was asked to give a talk on reinforcement learning in the text mining workshop, I was kind of wondering why. Because this is not directly related to text mining. And then after listening to Chauvin and Niloy, I kind of understood I'm here for the diversity factor. We've been hearing about text mining, and now you're going to hear about something else. And I have tried to kind of a very tortured way relate this to text mining. I hope that some of you can take away ideas from today's talk and apply it to text. So the talk is going to be in 2 parts, and the first part I'm going to give an introduction to kind of generic introduction to reinforcement learning. So there will be a lot of Greek in my slides. And I know it's kind of late in the day, so if you feel that it's getting too heavy, just put your hands up and wave or something like that, so that I'll move on more rapidly, right? And the second part of the talk, I'll focus on one specific aspect in reinforcement learning, which is what the explore-exploit dilemma that refers to, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more gruesome here, and how people work on that. The specific instance we'll focus on is the bandit problem. And I should say a priori that there's a lot of interest currently, especially in the online learning community, on bandit algorithms in particular. So that's one of the reasons they are seeing a revival, even though the original work on bandit algorithms goes back to the 1980s. So, but it's a huge trough. I mean, huge peak of papers in the 60s, and then a trough again in like 2000s. There'll be a huge surge of interest in bandit algorithms. So that's how the field has moved on. Okay. So let's start off by asking a few questions. I'm sure people are familiar with things like supervised learning and unsupervised learning, classification, clustering. Yes? Great. Right. How did you learn to cycle? Was it exactly? Okay. Was it supervised learning or was it unsupervised learning? Supervised. Really? Huh? Somebody was holding you the bar, but nobody was telling you how to push the pedal, when to push the pedal, whether you should sway this side or that side when it's cycling. So if you think about how supervised learning works, right? So I'll give you an example and then I'll say it is positive. I'll give you another example, then I'll say negative or something like that. Then how would supervised learning work in the case of cycling? Okay? I'll show you a cycle that is tilted this much. Okay, and moving forward at some speed. Now I'll say, press down right. So if I give you supervision like that, will you ever learn to cycle? Right? I mean, you basically say, oh, this is too hard a problem, throw away the cycle and then decide to walk. Right? Probably end up healthier, but you will not learn to cycle. Right? So it's something else, right? It's certainly not unsupervised, because you know you can get some kind of feedback from the system. Right? It's not completely unsupervised. So what is it that you are doing? As somebody said, you learn to cycle falling down. Yeah? So why did you fall down? Because you made a mistake, right? So you try things, you make mistakes, right? So this kind of trial and error learning, right? A lot of things that we do when we are trying to learn control is something that we achieve through trial and error learning. Right? In fact, humans even learn ways this way. So that is one way in which reinforcement is related to language. In that how humans acquire language, right? It's more of a trial and error process. Maybe he's trying to articulate things and then say no. You say no, that's not what I say. You are not telling the baby how to move their vocal cord or anything. You just tell it, oh, okay, no, that's not the right way to say it, and maybe tries out different things. Like, if you think about it, a lot of control that we learn, including walking, even standing up, running, games, a lot of it is through this kind of trial and error learning, right? So falling down hurts. So you get this kind of very, very minimal kind of feedback from the environment. Okay, you just say that, oh, no, that's not right. I never tell you what is the right thing to do. Or at least I don't tell it to you in a way that you can use it immediately. I can tell you, no, you have to stay balanced on the cycle. That's something, but can you use that information to figure out how to actually balance the cycle? No. So this is basically the idea of what reinforcement learning is. Right? So, okay, I'll come to that. So reinforcement learning is essentially a formalization of a trial and error learning mechanism. Okay. So it has got its roots, surprisingly, or not too surprisingly, in behavioral psychology. Okay. So if you look at some of the early papers, even in computational reinforcement learning, not really worrying about the biological aspects of it, some of the early work in modeling of learning process comes in the psychology journals. Okay. So only in the mid 80s did computer science people and the machine learning people start taking it up in a big way. So before that, people in psychology and other disciplines were working on it, and then later on people figured out that the math behind it, okay, was not very different from what people are doing in other forms of optimization, operations research, and so on. So now it's like an amalgam of various disciplines: psychology, AI, operations research, adaptive optimal control, and so on and so forth. Right? And of course, machine learning. Right? And so I'll just take a simple example, and that will kind of illustrate all the important concepts of reinforcement learning. Okay? Think of running a maze. So suppose I have a rat. Let's suppose enter the maze here. So there's a point A where it has to make a decision whether it's going to go left or right, and a point B and a point C where it has similar decisions it has to make. And the numbers on the maze essentially indicate the amount of food, okay, the rat will get at the end of the maze. Okay? So because of the psychology rules, I'm giving you a rat running a maze example, right? And so think about what are the steps that the problem solver here has to do. So you have to make a sequence of decisions. Right? So when you make the first decision at A, I choose to go left or right, and I'm not told whether it is right or wrong. Right? So let's say I choose to go right at A. Right. Okay, at A. Right? And then I go to C, and then I choose to go left at C. Right? I actually get some food. So I'm getting a reward. Right? So in some sense, I have succeeded in what I wanted to do. Right? Then again I start out at A, but this time for a change I choose to go left at A, and I go left at B. Nothing. So now I have decided, okay, going left at A seems to be bad, because I'm not getting any food. So let me go right at A. Okay. What is this here? So there are two components here. One, I have to make a sequence of decisions. Okay. Two, I'm getting a feedback about the sequence in total at the end of the trial. Okay. And I have to learn to apportion the feedback that I'm getting to each of the actions I took along the way. Right? So the 0 I get in the second trial was due to the mistake I made at B. Okay. While the decision I made at A is correct. But the conclusion I arrived at was wrong. I said, oh, going left at A is bad. Okay, so you have to repeat the trials multiple times. Okay, it's not just once. You're not going to be able to learn about things just once, because there's a sequence of decisions that are involved, and therefore there could be combinatorily many things that you could do. So there is a significant amount of repetition that you have to do, okay, before you can figure out that this is the right thing. Is it clear? So what's happening here? You have a sequence of decisions, you have delayed rewards, and you have to assign credit for whatever happens at the end to all the things that came along the way. Okay? But things are not this easy. Actually, it's more complex. Okay? Things could be stochastic. Right? So the guy who is setting up the maze can forget to put the food there some days. So you set up the maze, you just put the rat in before you put the food, and the rat runs the maze and comes to wherever it usually gets 5, and suddenly finds the food is not there. say maybe 1 in 5 days you forget to put food there. Okay? So that doesn't mean that suddenly became a bad option, right? So 0.8 into 5 is still higher than whatever it's going to get at anywhere else. And on other days, maze could be slippery, you know. You try to go left, but you skip because some oil spilled there and you go right. Okay, they get up and you are confused and then you continue running the maze and so on and so forth. Things are not always clean and neat. Right? And you want to set out to go somewhere and suddenly it starts raining, so you get delayed and so on and so forth. It's not always clean, right? Stochastic aspects are also there. So in total, putting things together, so reinforcement learning, so you have a sequence of actions that you have to take. Okay? Stochastic effects, both of the actions, okay, and the final evaluation that you are getting. The evaluation themselves are delayed, okay, noisy, and you have to learn to apportion this evaluation. So these are the various components of reinforcement learning that you have to deal with. Right? So summarizing them. Okay. Okay, so summarizing them is on the next slide. But then this is the 4 bullets that I kind of takeaway points here, right? It's a trial and error learning method, and sometimes erroneously people refer to reinforcement learning as algorithm. As you saw here, I have not talked about any algorithm so far. I'm just talking about a problem setup. Right? It's a new paradigm. Okay? There are like hundreds of algorithms that try to solve this reinforcement learning problem. Okay? And the crucial thing about reinforcement learning is that the concept of interaction, right, is very, very important. It's very central to reinforcement learning. If you think about other forms of machine learning that we are exposed to, right, so it's mostly done offline. The occasional setup where you get data in a streaming fashion and so on and so forth, but there is very little concept of an interaction with the system. In reinforcement learning, interaction is at the center of the whole thing. Right? You have to interact with the environment. So you have to figure out what is the right thing. Okay, this cannot be done in a completely offline manner. Okay. So what I mean by learn from interaction, the abstraction that we use is that of an environment with which some agent is interacting. So the agent senses some state of the environment, okay, and in response, it takes an action. Okay. So in our maze case, the state of the environment would be whether it is at A, B, or C. Okay. The actions the agent will take is go left or go right. In response to that, the state of the system will change. So if you are in A and you say go left, you will go to B, right? And then you also get an evaluation of the environment of how you are doing so far. That's the food that we have. The evaluation could come at any point during a sequence of actions, not necessarily something that comes at the end. Okay? You can think of many things that kind of fall into this kind of a setup, you know. Most popularly, things like gameplay, right? You sense the world, which is a board that you are looking at, then you make a move, right? And then if you win the game, you get a reward, and so on and so forth. Or think of driving a car, right? So you look around, you look at the state of the traffic, then you decide to go left or right, or decide to honk, okay? Decide to accelerate. Everything changes the world. Okay? And if you get where you are going to, okay, then you are happy, and you get a reward. Okay? Let's not consider alternatives, given that I have a long drive ahead of me after the talk. So, yeah. So the second component, as I said here, is the stochastic environment. You get noisy, delay, and in a mathematical sense, the evaluation is a scalar. So that's why we reduce the food quantity to say 5 or 2 or something, right? I never talked about how much food and how tasty or anything. We just reduced it to a single number, right? So that is one abstraction that we will be repeatedly using. And we will see, because I will show you some of the applications of reinforcement learning, we will see that this can be used to model a fairly wide variety of situations, right? Where you have a single number as your evaluation. Right? And the goal of the agent is to maximize some measure of long-term performance. So it shouldn't be something like, well, playing chess, I shouldn't be just interested in capturing the queen of the opponent. I should be interested in winning the game. So that has to be a long-term performance measure. I shouldn't be looking at short-term games. So that's basically the goal. So like I said in the beginning, right, this is going to be a really different talk in the sense that it is a basic tutorial on reinforcement learning. So, yeah.
So just to make sure I've got it right,
yeah.
can we say that we make that statement?
Not really. See, the thing is, in both in swarm intelligence or PSO, at least the way I understand it, right, you are basically looking to find the global optima of the function, right? So it doesn't matter what path I take to reach there, right? I'm only interested in reaching there finally. It's basically a optimization technique, right? But here it's about learning to control, right? The trajectory itself is important. In PCO and swarm, other things, that's not really a yeah, but in a broader sense, right, all of them are solving some optimization problem, right? So in reinforcement learning also you're solving some kind of an optimization problem. We look at what the objective function that you'll be optimizing in a method. Okay. Any other questions here? So this, like I said, this can be a basic tutorial. I'm not going to really talk about some advanced applications that we have looked at and any work that we have been doing in our group or anything like that. So if you have questions, please stop at any point, ask. The goal of this talk is to make sure you go away with some understanding of what reinforcement learning is and different use cases, not necessarily some of the cutting edge stuff that's going on. Okay? Right, so this is not supervised learning, again driving home this point. Right? So in supervised learning you have an input, you have an agent that produces an output, and you have a target. So you compare against the target, you have an error signal, okay, which you use to tune your parameters. So in our case, there is no target. Okay. So you have very sparse supervision, that's an evaluation that comes to you, right? And therefore you cannot get an error signal. Okay. And therefore you cannot form the gradient of the error and then optimize your parameters with respect to that gradient and so on and so forth. So all of that is not ruled out. Right? So you basically have to do some kind of trial and error method. So people here are familiar with optimal control theory. Okay, so they have some methods called perturbation methods. Right? So reinforcement learning algorithms are very close to what are called perturbation methods. So basically the idea is you start off with some parameters, you perturb the parameters by some epsilon action. Just disturb the parameters by some epsilon, figure out how the performance is affected. Okay? And if the performance goes up, then that's a good direction to move in. Then you keep the epsilon change. If performance goes down, try to go in a different direction. So that's basically the analogy here. Okay, so it's a very close type to adaptive optimization, right? And the other part that distinguishes it, which we'll actually discard when we go to the bandit problem, is that the input here is in some sense under the control of the agent. We take an action, so that's going to determine what is the next input you will see. If at A I choose to go left, then I will see B as my next input. If I choose to go right, I will see C as my next input. So that's also a feature that's missing from supervised learning.
So here the action is there for the input, right? Here the action is the input.
The input is the state. The input is the state, the A, B or C that you see.
Depending on the action, the state is changing.
Exactly. So this is what is happening here, right? So depending on the action, the environment will change. Right? That will change the state, that will change the input I'm seeing in the next time step. And it's not really unsupervised learning also, right? Because I am getting some kind of supervision, I'm getting an evaluation, and my goal is not to just find patterns in the input, which is what we do with unsupervised learning, clustering and association rules and so on and so forth. But it's to maximize this evaluation. Okay, that's my goal. So in that sense, it's also not unsupervised learning. So just to get it clear, so we are talking about a new beast here. Okay? So, like I shouldn't be saying this, but for the quote-unquote modern-day researcher in machine learning, what caught the fancy with regard to reinforcement learning is this work by the guy Jerry Tesaro from IBM. Okay? And he trained a reinforcement learning agent to play a game called backgammon. So how many of you know about backgammon? 1, 2, 3. So it's like, okay, thanks. How many of you know Ludo? Ah, good, great. So think of Ludo played on a board like this, okay? Instead of playing on a cross-shaped board, right? Instead of playing on a plus-shaped board. So the goal is very similar, right? You start off, you have a home base, you take your coins and you go around the board and then you take them off the board, right? So that's what happens. So black starts here, goes around and gets off the board. Okay, white starts here, goes around the board and has to go off the board. And you can cut each other's pieces and so on and so forth. But there are a lot more complicating factors here. Backgammon is several centuries old and very popular game, especially in the Middle East. So popular that there's actually a world championship of backgammon. So you don't have a world championship, Ludo, I hope. But you do have a world championship of backgammon, and people write books like they write about chess, you know. People write books on how to play backgammon and so on. So there are strategies and etc. But the problem with trying to automate playing backgammon is that the branching factor, right? So if people remember AI, game trees and so on and so forth, the branching factor for backgammon is like 400. Right? And writing game search algorithms for that is really hard. And you also have the stochastic component to it because you have to throw a die, and based on the outcome of the die you move. So it's just really complicated. And so there will be several attempts doing this, but Jerry Tesaro set up this reinforcement learning agent, which this is what moved it from the realm of science to science fiction, learned by playing against itself. And this is what really caught the fancy of people. Nobody sat and programmed it or anything. He just made 2 copies of this program, made them play against themselves, and then trained it. They just learned along the way. So it's like take 2 people, put them away in a room, lock them up, and say play backgammon against each other for 1,000,000 years. Okay, and then you take them out and see how good a player they are. Well, I mean, given the man hours the programs played backgammon, okay, you are not too far off. So and then it was so good at the end of the training period that it was able to beat the world champion in backgammon on a consistent basis. So this is something that caught people's fancy, and you can see how it maps in, right? Very naturally to the reinforcement learning setting. So I have a board position, so 30 pieces, 24 locations. So I can know where they are, right? And then I have my actions are very clear to me. So I move the pieces around the board. So those are the actions, right? And the evaluation is also very clear. If you win the game, you get some points. If you lose the game, you lose some points and so on. The mapping to the reinforcement learning setting is very clear, but just that it's not trivial to get this to work because the input space is fairly large. Okay, so you have to do significant amount of engineering to get this to work. So it's not easy. But the fact that he got it to work caught a lot of people's attention, and then kind of brought in many people to work in this area. Okay? So the reason I was a little hesitant to say, finally I avoided saying this, that this was the first big application of reinforcement learning that caught people's attention. Because in the 60s, there was this guy, Samuel, okay, who again worked for IBM, T.J. Watson, who trained a reinforcement learning agent to play checkers. Now, people know the game checkers, right? So checkers is slightly harder to automate because the branching factor is very large because all the pieces can move very similarly. So checkers is harder game to automate than chess. And so Samuel's trained a checkers player. And it was so good that IBM actually took it around the country in the US, putting it on display. You know, people used to come to auditorium like this, watch Samuel's second player program, play against humans and so on and so forth. But people don't remember it anymore. I mean, 60s. But then that was the first time that reinforcement learning caught people's fancy, but nothing much came out of it because people found it difficult to replicate that in other domains. So not so with Irrigan. Okay? And let's get a little bit more formal as far as to what we are talking about here. So, just going back to the agent environment interface, the agent has gone up, the environment has come down, if you notice here. So, the way we are going to look at it is that the agent will sense a state at time t. So, the times that I am talking about here are kind of a hypothetical time. These are not really wall clock times or anything, they are not real time or anything, it's just some kind of a stage if you want. So at stage t, okay, I'll sense st, I'll take an action at in response, okay, and then I'll observe state st plus 1. The environment will change state, it will give me st plus 1, it will also give me a reward rt plus 1 locked away. Okay, so is this clear? Okay, so I have some known set of states, yes, okay, from which I'll be drawing observations, okay, and I also have a known set of actions A, okay, and it could be that each state has some subset of the large set of actions A, which I can perform in that state. If you think of gameplay, obviously I can't make every move in every state, right? So I need my pawn to be somewhere before I can move it to the next square. So only some moves are possible. So that's basically a subset of moves I'm going to handle. Does that make sense? And so the goal of the agent is to learn a policy, okay, which is basically mapping from states to action probabilities. Okay. So you could think of it as two different things. So for each state, I learn a probability distribution over the actions, or for a state action pair, I learn a probability. Okay. So what does it mean? So what does pi of SEA mean? The probability that when ST equal S, okay, AT will be equal to A. And so in general, you could learn policies that are not stationary, that change over time. So in which case that, so pi 1 will be different from pi 2, will be different from pi 3, and so on and so forth. But quite often, A, to make our lives simpler, and B, because it is sufficient, okay, we end up learning a stationary policy. So wherein pi 1 equal to pi 2 equal to pi 3. So it doesn't matter at what time do I see state S. Okay, when I see state, I'll always have the same probability of taking action. So, what do all reinforcement learning methods tell us is how to change your policy as a result of the rewards that you get. Okay. So, how will the policy look like in our maze running example? Could say that, okay, if you are in state A, with probability 1 go right. Okay. If you are in state C, with probability 1 go left. Okay. Or if you are in state C, with probability 1 go right. Something like that. Or with probability 0.8 go left, with probability 0.2 go right. So this could be a policy. Does that make sense? In state A, with some probability I'll go right. With state C, some probability I'll go right, I'll go left. I also need to specify action distribution in state B. Okay, but in this case, it really doesn't matter because I'll never reach state B, but still we have to specify something. We'll say that in state B, with some probability, say 0.8, you'll go right. Okay, probably 0.2 will go left. Now, I run the maze. Okay, I go right, then I go right and I get a reward of 0. If you remember the maze, if you do 2 rights or 2 lefts, you always get a reward of 0. So I go right at A, I go right at B, I get a reward of 0. So now what I will do, depending on what my learning algorithm is, I will try to reduce the probability of doing whatever I did right now, because that gave me no reward. So what I will say is, I will say, okay, with probability 0.9 I will go right, probability 0.1 I will go left. So that's basically the idea behind most of the reinforcement learning algorithm. So whatever got you a reward, whatever looks good to you, do it more often. Okay, whatever is bad, do it less often. Okay. And roughly the agent's goal and during the process of his learning is to get as much reward as it can over the long run. Okay, so if I run the maze like a million times, how much reward will I get? Yeah, so this is a question I brought up earlier. So the scalar reward, is it a good enough signal? Okay. It turns out that it's surprisingly effective, even though when I teach an elective on reinforcement learning and I ask students this question, quite often they say, oh no, it's not sufficient, so we have to do something more. How can a single number be good enough for you, and so on and so forth. And then I give them an assignment saying, okay, come up with situations that cannot ever be modeled using a scalar reward signal, right? It's not that trivial. There's a wide variety of problems, okay, which you can use to model just using this kind of scalar signal. And there are a bunch of other things. Yeah, so slides will be available online, I suppose, at some point, so you should be able to pick this up then. But the two important things here, a goal should be outside the agent's direct control. So when I get the reward, I should do a sequence of actions and get a reward, right? I shouldn't say, oh, just give me a reward. Right? So that cannot happen, you know. So yeah, I'm not going to really talk about the neuroscience aspects of reinforcement learning here. Just one thing though. So there is this the reward chemical a reward neuromodulator in our brain called dopamine. So which actually makes us feel good about a lot of things, So that's what drives a lot of learning that humans do. And it's well established that the dopamine signal, the dopamine variations in our brain kind of encodes a reinforcement learning signal. Okay? So it's just like this. So if you can find a way to get dopamine into your body, right? If you kind of find a way to make your brain directly emit dopamine without going through the learning process, without finding food, So if you're hungry and you find food and you eat food, you also get some kind of a dopamine release. So if you can somehow short circuit that, right, and get your dopamine fix, okay, then you're going to become basket cases. So that's what happens to several cases of drug addiction, right? So there are certain neurotransmitters which are stimulated by drugs. Dopamine is one of them, serotonin is another. But so you become drug addicts. You stop doing what you're supposed to do because you know how to get your dopamine fix. So it's a serious thing. But in computationally also, if you're going to allow the agent to be able to directly control its reward, that will be the optimal solution it finds. It will not try to solve the maze. It will just try to get the food every time. So that's one important thing that you have to keep in mind. Second thing is, unless the agent is able to measure the sexes frequently during its lifespan, right, it will not be able to learn much. And so frequently is a matter of speaking. Later on, I'll talk about how people use reinforcement learning to learn about what news stories to show to you on a web page, okay, or what ads to put on pages. So you go to Google and then there's all this computational advertising that happens, right? So depending on the query that you type in and so on and so forth, you get some